Hello, welcome back to Echoes of Crime. And today, I want to tell you a story so scary that you won't be able to ignore it. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. It's the morning of May 4, 2010 in the heart of Edinburgh. A calm spring day. Suddenly, the scene shifts. The body of a 38-year-old woman lies hidden in the boot of a car. The man driving it goes about his life, dropping his child at school, eating dinner with his family, attending a school concert. And she is gone, no trace, no farewell. That chilling contrast, it's the opening beat of our story. Because that morning began like any other for Suzanne Pilley, a devoted daughter, a loyal friend, an upbeat bookkeeper, heading into one of Edinburgh's elegant office buildings on Thistle Street. But around 8:50 a.m., just a few steps from her desk, everything changed. She vanished, swallowed by silence. Here's how it started. Suzanne, bright and punctual, left home in her distinctive purple-blue coat, grabbed a bite at Sainsbury's, sent cheerful texts to her parents about feeding her cat Mercury, and started her final walk to work. But she never reached her desk. No one heard from her again after a last blurry CCTV snapshot seconds before she disappeared into the building. By evening, her family knew she was missing. Police swiftly mobilized. Cameras. Witnesses, nothing made sense. Her flat, untouched bank account inactive, passport in place. Her beloved cat and fish waiting, signs that she never planned to disappear. Friends warned of one possibility only. This was foul play. And so began the hunt. Within days, attention turned to one person, David Gilroy, a married man and regional operations manager at Suzanne's company, who once had a volatile on-again, off-again affair with her. In interviews, he spoke coldly and calculatedly. Questions haunted detectives. Why did his texts, some 400 in a month, stop dead the moment she vanished? Why did he show up at work looking disheveled, scratching at his face, and cover the marks with makeup? Little by little, the case was reconstructed. In the early morning hours, Gilroy quietly tracked Suzanne to the building basement, where it's believed he confronted her. A violent struggle ensued. Minutes later, she lay dead in the stairwell. Gilroy returned to work, gathered excuses and alibis, then went home to get his car. He drove into remote Argo, where police believe he dumped her body in the wilderness between Tindrum and Inverary. Yet he was photographed holding family dinner in Edinburgh that same evening as if nothing had happened. Cadaver dogs later reacted to areas in his car and office basement. Forensic experts traced vegetation beneath his wheels that matched forest terrain. CCTV confirmed bizarre detours and unexplained delays in his journey. And still, no body. By March 2012, a jury convicted him. There was no body, no murder weapon, no direct forensics, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming enough. Gilroy was sentenced to life with a minimum of 18 years. Suzanne's remains remain undiscovered. Her family denied closure. Her killer the only person who knows where she lies. It's a case that challenges us. Could love turn to obsession? Could control swap to violence in minutes? Could someone so calm and normal hide such darkness beneath the surface? If you find yourself holding your breath now, waiting for more, don't forget to subscribe to follow the next part. Before the headlines, before the missing posters. Before the haunting silence of May 4th, 2010, there was Suzanne. If you met her even once, you wouldn't forget her. She was the kind of woman who sent thank you texts to her parents for feeding her cat. The kind of friend who made time to volunteer in her community even after long days at work. She had a warm laugh, a tight circle of friends, and a fierce love for the small things in life: books, nature walks, music festivals, her cat Mercury. She was grounded, bright, loyal. But Suzanne also had a past she didn't always talk about, one littered with heartbreak and quiet pain. After marrying her longtime friend Peter in a whirlwind Vegas ceremony in 2004, the two separated just 4 years later. But even through the divorce, they remained close. Peter once said that Suzanne had a way of throwing herself fully into whatever she believed in, sometimes to a fault. That trait would later become heartbreakingly significant. Because after Peter came a series of relationships that started sweet but soured. One fiancé hit a cocaine problem. Another turned violent. Suzanne, trying to heal, moved homes often, switched gears professionally, and focused on building a quiet, steady life again. She took a job as a bookkeeper at Infrastructure Managers Limited, a stable role where she was well-liked, respected, and importantly, never late, ever. And then she met David Gilroy. David was charming, older, seemingly grounded. He had a background in the Royal Navy, reaching the rank of Chief Petty Officer. Now he was the regional operations manager in her company, a man with authority, experience, and presence. But he was also married with 2 children. Their relationship started in secret. Suzanne fell fast. Maybe she thought this time would be different. Maybe she believed in second chances. But those who knew her best would later say the whole affair was always unsteady. Sometimes he was romantic. Sometimes cold and controlling. It was passionate, but it burned unevenly. They lived together briefly when David split from his wife Andrea, but it didn't last. He moved back in with his family, and Suzanne tried to move on. Still, there was a strange, invisible tether between them. A pull she couldn't break and one he refused to let go. Text messages paint a picture clearer than any statement ever could. Suzanne told friends she was trying to distance herself, that she'd met someone new, Mark, and was finally starting a fresh chapter. But David's grip only tightened. He bombarded her with messages, sometimes dozens in a single day, pleading, guilt-tripping, obsessing. "I'll always love you," he wrote just the day before she vanished. Suzanne told a friend she thought he'd finally gotten the hint. But even then, she still saw him one more time, that final weekend before everything unraveled, and that's where the story twists sharply into darkness. Because while Suzanne was trying to turn the page, David wasn't ready to let the book close. He hacked into her email. He stole her phone. He even threw her belongings out of a window in a fit of rage. She had to change the locks on her flat. She told friends she didn't feel safe, but he still lingered, quietly watching. Waiting, then May 4th, the day Suzanne disappeared. Police would later learn that David arrived at work unusually early. He hovered around the office, logging into his computer, but never really getting anything done. Colleagues said he looked off, shaky, sweaty, his eyes glazed over. They noticed scratches on his arms and hands. Some even said it looked like he was wearing makeup trying to cover them up. And the messages. The flood of desperate texts and voicemails that had come almost hourly from David in the weeks prior, they stopped. Dead, like a switch flipped. The man who had once obsessed over Suzanne suddenly went silent. When police questioned him 2 days later, he downplayed everything. Said the relationship had ended months ago, that she'd moved on and so had he. But behind that calm exterior, investigators saw something else: panic, paranoia. A man trying too hard to act untouched. And then, just days after she vanished, David reported a break-in at his home. He claimed someone stole his phone and laptop. Strangely, nothing else was taken. Just the devices that could have held conversations, plans, secrets. The timing, too convenient, the story, full of holes. Investigators didn't buy it. They began piecing together a timeline not just of Suzanne's last day, but of David's movements before and after. The pattern was starting to emerge. His morning shift, his odd trip to get his car. The sudden change of a work appointment that took him far out to Argyll, a place he had no real reason to be, except maybe one: isolation. Suzanne's body was never found, but traces of her final moments were hiding in plain sight, in erratic decisions, in digital trails, in the eerie quiet of a man who had once shouted so loud. And the deeper police looked, the more one terrifying question kept echoing louder. Did David Gilroy lure Suzanne to the basement of her own office building, knowing exactly what he was going to do? If you're still with me, and I know this story grips tight, don't forget to follow the channel to hear the next part. There are details coming that will change everything you thought you knew about this case. By the time Suzanne Pilley had been missing for just over 2 weeks, her case had already shifted from hopeful to heartbreaking. What began as a search for a missing woman had now become something darker. On May 20th, 2010, authorities made it official. They were no longer looking for Suzanne alive. They were investigating her murder. But how do you prove a murder with no weapon, no blood, and no body? It's every detective's worst nightmare, and yet, for the team working Suzanne's case, the pressure only made their focus sharper. They had to work backwards, piece by piece, moment by moment. And the closer they examined David Gilroy's behavior, the clearer the picture became. Let's rewind to the morning of May 4th again, but this time through David's eyes. At 8:36 a.m., David dropped his daughter off at school. He didn't drive, he took the bus to Thistle Street. Odd for someone who had a car. He logged into his work computer at 8:40 a.m., 6 minutes before Susan was last seen walking toward the office. CCTV placed her only seconds away from the building. That was the last time anyone saw her. What happened next is theory, yes, but a theory built on an avalanche of circumstantial evidence. Investigators believe David intercepted Susan before she could make it upstairs. He lured her into the underground car park beneath their office building, possibly under the pretense of needing to talk. But this wasn't a conversation. This was premeditated. Whether she refused to speak with him or rejected him again or just tried to walk away, we may never know. But what's almost certain is this: something violent happened in that basement. Police believe he killed her right there, likely by strangulation. No screams, no struggle heard, just a quiet, sudden end to Suzanne's life in a concrete stairwell. And then he left her there, walked back upstairs, sat down at his desk like nothing had happened. But people noticed. David looked wrong, pale, nervous, his shirt damp with sweat, eyes blown wide, shaking. And those scratches visible now raw, red, inconsistent with anything mundane. Some coworkers said it looked like he had tried to cover them with makeup. Others said his calm facade was slipping. He barely lasted a few hours at work before making an excuse to leave. And when he did, he didn't take the bus home. This time he got a taxi to his mother's house, where she drove him to retrieve his car. From there, David made multiple trips back and forth to the office car park alone. Late at night, moving something. The theory is devastatingly clear. That was when he transferred Suzanne's body into the boot of his car. And what he did next is chilling. That very night, the man who had just murdered a woman and stuffed her in his trunk sat through a school concert with his family. Smiled, ate dinner at a restaurant, then parked the car, her body still inside it, on his own driveway. The next morning, David told work he needed to travel for a meeting. A meeting that up until the day before wasn't supposed to happen for another week. He insisted he'd go alone. He drove 130 miles to Lochgilfed, a remote area surrounded by moorland, forest, and rugged terrain. Here's what investigators would later find. His fuel use on the drive didn't add up. He consumed far more than necessary. He had long, unexplained gaps in his journey, over 2 hours unaccounted for, and on the way back, the same. Areas that should have taken 30 minutes somehow took nearly 2 hours. At some point in that window, those hidden 5 hours, police believe David Gilroy disposed of Suzanne's body. Later, cadaver dogs would be brought in. They picked up interest in 3 spots, 1 in the office car park, 2 in the boot of David's Vauxhall Vectra. The car also reeked of cleaning products, and experts found damage to its undercarriage, indicating it had been driven over very rough terrain. Foliage and plant debris were lodged in the wheel arches, plants native to remote woodland, not city streets. One small clue after another. But they still didn't have the one thing they needed most: Suzanne herself. So police got strategic. They went wide, tracking David's every move in the days before and after the crime. They mapped his steps using CCTV, phone data, fuel logs, even shop receipts. That's how they discovered something else. The night after Suzanne vanished, David bought 4 cans of air freshener. Why would someone do that? It was becoming increasingly clear he was covering his tracks. But there was still more. During searches of his home, investigators found inconsistencies in his story. He claimed someone broke in and stole only his phone and laptop, nothing else of value. The timing? Suspicious. And no evidence ever supported that version of events. Police believed those devices might have held data, photos, messages, search history that would have proven his guilt, but now they were gone. Yet even without them, Suzanne's own phone told a story. Before May 4th, David had sent her hundreds of messages, some romantic, many obsessive. On May 3rd alone, he sent 15 texts and a voicemail saying he would always love her. Then on May 4th, radio silence. The abrupt stop said more than words ever could. And the final blow, the damage to his car, the scratches, the erratic route, the sudden scheduling of a pointless meeting in a remote area. When stacked together, these weren't coincidences. They were a cover-up. And still, Suzanne's parents waited, still they hoped. But as the days passed, the silence grew louder, and it leads us here to a chilling question. Can someone really erase a person from the world and then smile through dinner the same night? There's so much more still hidden. And if this story has moved you, stay with me. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because in the next part, we'll walk into the courtroom where David Gilroy stood trial for murder without a single trace of Suzanne. By March 2012, the case of Suzanne Pilley had gripped all of Scotland, and not because there had been some dramatic discovery in the woods or a sudden twist, but because a man was about to stand trial for her murder, even though her body had never been found. Think about that. No crime scene, no fingerprints, no DNA, no blood, no weapon, no body. And yet David Gilroy was about to face a jury. The pressure on prosecutors was enormous. They knew the only way forward was to build a case from shadows, reconstruct every move, chart every strange decision David made before and after May 4th. It would be one of the most complex cases in Scottish legal history, a murder trial built entirely on circumstantial evidence. But it would also be a testament to how powerful human behavior can be when the physical proof is missing. The prosecution painted the picture with chilling precision. They told the jury about David's controlling behavior, his jealousy, and the obsessive texts. They showed how his messages suddenly went silent the very morning Suzanne disappeared. They mapped out his strange movements, the unplanned road trip, the bizarre fuel usage, the unexplained stops on remote roads. They laid out the scratches he tried to hide with makeup. The suspicious break-in at his home, which conveniently wiped out his phone and laptop. The air fresheners, the damage to his car suspension, and the foliage stuck underneath. One by one, these weren't damning, but together. Together, they formed a pattern. The Crown said it simply: David Gilroy could not accept that Suzanne was moving on. On May 4th, he lured her into the underground car park. He killed her. And then he went to extraordinary lengths to hide her body and pretend nothing had happened. They didn't need to prove how he did it, only that he did. Defense lawyers, of course, pushed back. They reminded the jury, no body. No proof of death. Maybe Suzanne had run away, maybe someone else was involved. Maybe the whole thing was being twisted by grief and guesswork. They leaned heavily on the absence of hard evidence. And they made David out to be the victim of a narrative, an easy man to blame. But David didn't help himself. He didn't testify in court. He didn't explain his behavior. He didn't offer an alternative version of events. He just sat there stone-faced while his life was dissected. And then came the voices of people who knew him, witnesses who had seen his temper. His wife, Andrea, was listed as a Crown witness but exercised her right not to speak. Others spoke of controlling behavior, disturbing threats, and violent outbursts. There was even a second set of charges, allegations that David had assaulted his wife, threatened his children, and attacked a man named Scott outside Suzanne's flat. While most of those charges were dropped before the trial, the pattern was undeniable. David Gilroy was no quiet, misunderstood man. He had a history of intimidation and control. As the trial neared its end, jurors had to face a brutal question. Were all these coincidences truly coincidences? After 4 weeks, the verdict came in. By a majority, David Gilroy was found guilty of the murder of Suzanne Pilley and of attempting to defeat the ends of justice by hiding her body and misleading investigators. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years behind bars. And yet, even in that moment of justice, something was missing. Suzanne's body had still not been found. For her parents, Sylvia and Rob, the verdict was a small comfort but no true closure. They couldn't lay their daughter to rest. They couldn't say goodbye. Rob once said in a public plea, "I often feel that if I could put a closure to it, maybe the grieving would be a lot better." But it's just one of those things you never seem to get to the end of. The police knew where they had to look: Argyle Forest Park. Hundreds of square miles of wilderness, steep and thick with forest. It was near where David had taken his unexplained detour, and experts believed that somewhere along that remote route, Susan was buried. But 400 miles of rough terrain is a massive task even with search teams, cadaver dogs, and helicopters. Volunteers combed the area. Specialized teams crawled through muddy clearings, ravines, and woodland. Nothing. For years they looked, but Susan remains missing. It became a haunting reality. David Gilroy had killed her and buried her so well, so strategically, that the truth may never be found. Still, the Pilley family never gave up hope. They launched appeals. They spoke in interviews. They begged for new witnesses to come forward, someone who may have seen a parked car off a remote road, a man standing alone in the forest, anything. But no new leads came, and David, he has never confessed, never expressed remorse, never told the family where their daughter is. Not once. And that raises a disturbing question that lingers in so many unsolved disappearances. What kind of person takes a life and then buries the truth along with the body? If this story has kept you thinking, kept you up at night, don't go anywhere. There's one final chapter. In part 5, we'll explore the aftermath, how Suzanne's memory lives on, how her family turned grief into change, and how justice is still waiting for her in the forests of Argyle. If you believe this case deserves to be heard to the very end, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Justice may have a name, it may have a face, a courtroom, a sentence, but for the family of Suzanne Pilley, justice still feels unfinished. Because how do you move forward when the person you love, your daughter, your friend, is still missing, when you can't lay flowers on a grave, when there's no place to go on her birthday, no urn, no headstone, only memories and questions? Suzanne's parents, Sylvia and Rob, became the quiet heroes in a long, painful aftermath. Not by choice, not because they wanted to be, but because they had to be. In every interview, Rob's voice trembled between composure and agony. He would describe Suzanne's laugh, her stubborn kindness, her goofy sense of humor. And then, with just as much clarity, he would talk about the cold horror of knowing her body was out there somewhere, alone. They pleaded publicly more than once for David Gilroy to do the right thing, to speak, to give them the location, just a map, a clue, one sentence, something. But silence became its own form of cruelty. Even after being found guilty, Gilroy refused to admit anything. He filed appeals, claimed his innocence, but never gave the one thing that could ease a family's torment, the truth. Suzanne's mother once said, "It doesn't make sense to me. He's behind bars, he's serving his time. Why not give us the chance to find her, to bring her home?" But maybe, for some men like David Gilroy, control is the only currency they have left. And by keeping that one last secret, he ensures that even in prison he still holds power over the family he destroyed. Meanwhile, the forest in Argyle remains unchanged. Quiet, thick, unforgiving. Dozens of search operations were conducted over the years, some small, some large. But the terrain is vast. It's the kind of place where a small, hastily dug grave could go unnoticed forever, swallowed by undergrowth and time. One forensics expert once said, "If she was buried up there, it's possible she will never be found." We may have already walked past her and not known it. But still, people try. Even as years passed, new volunteers joined the effort. Some were strangers, others were inspired by Rob and Sylvia's perseverance. A few were search and rescue veterans, others were just locals with a strong heart. One even said, "I don't know Suzanne, but I know how I'd feel if it were my daughters." That empathy, that echo of shared humanity, is what's kept her memory alive. In 2018, a tree in Edinburgh was decorated with a red ribbon for every day Susan had been missing. Over 2,900 ribbons fluttered in the wind, each one a reminder that she was still gone. Each one asking a silent question, "Where is Susan?" And that question doesn't just haunt her family, it haunts the system too. Because this case exposed a painful flaw in the law. Even with a conviction, there is no legal way to force a killer to reveal the location of a body. The Pillies campaigned for change, joining voices with other families of no-body murder victims to push for legislation that would encourage or even compel confessions as part of parole eligibility. In some countries, similar laws already exist, laws where convicted murderers must disclose the location of their victims before being considered for release. It's sometimes called Helen's Law in the UK, named after another tragic case. But enforcement remains inconsistent, and in Suzanne's case there was no leverage. David Gilroy will be eligible for parole in the early 2030s. Whether he ever gets it remains to be seen. But unless something changes, he may walk free, still carrying the truth with him. And so we come back to the beginning, to a young woman who did nothing wrong, who tried to live, to love, to move on, who wanted the same things any of us want: peace, security, a future. Instead, she became a victim of control, of rage, of a man who believed if he couldn't have her, no one could. But Suzanne Pilly was more than a name in a headline. She was a daughter, a friend, a colleague, a woman who should have grown old surrounded by the people who loved her. We tell her story not just to remember her, but to remind ourselves that justice isn't always complete. And that even when a courtroom declares guilt, the pain doesn't end there. So if this story stayed with you, if Suzanne's name now lives in your mind, do one thing: remember her. And if by some miracle you know anything at all about that road in Argyll, that forest trail, that lost May morning, speak. Because someone somewhere still knows something. And silence, after all this time, is just another kind of cruelty. Thank you for listening to Suzanne's story. Until the next time, take care of each other. And never forget the missing.